welcome to the profile series. I don't know where the summer just really flew by and this snuck up on us, but welcome to our newly renovated auditorium. It's quite a difference from the mauve that we had. The renovation of the auditorium was funded in part by the Robert S. Morrison Foundation and an ARC grant, so I want to recognize them for their support. And the blue hallway is gone, so our students are really excited about the changes we made over the summer, so welcome. We're going to try a different format this morning. We're going to have a conversation, and then we'll open it up to questions. So again, thank you for being here this morning and your support of our Profiles Breakfast series. So I'll turn it over to Greg.
Great, thanks, Dean Stocker. Everybody can hear me okay back there? We're good? Okay, great. Well, thank you for being here this morning on the kickoff for the 2019-2020. God, that's hard for me to think about, 2020. Profiles Breakfast Series. So we're excited to have Dr. Al Green here. He's a board member with Kent Displays, as well as CEO and president of AMG Consulting Group. So we want to talk to you a little bit about development, workforce development, and as that applies to particularly manufacturing sector this morning. So this is an interesting format for me. We're doing this interview session, so I'm trying to figure out how to get comfortable down here. So if I'm dancing around, I'm usually standing up and on my feet and having to sit down and relax a little bit. But I am glad I wore some colorful socks this morning, which I didn't intend to show off, but I'm glad I made that choice. But just wanted to start out and give you a little bit of background of Dr. Green here, so you can have an understanding in the context from where he's coming from with the remarks he's going to make to us this morning. So Dr. Green, he's the managing principal of AMG Consulting Group, which is founded in 2019. So AMG Consulting, they focus on the business of technology commercialization, new product ideation, and executive mentoring. He also serves as an advisor, as I'd mentioned, on the board to Kent Displays. So prior to starting his consulting group, he was the president and CEO of Kent Displays from 2007 to 2018. Kent Displays is a global leader in e-writer display technology and the maker of Boogie Board brand e-writers. So many of us may be familiar with those. They're used in education, business. So we may be very familiar with some of the products that have come out of Kent Displays. So the Boogie Board is based on technology from renowned Liquid Crystal Institute at Kent State University. First launched in 2010, millions have been sold in the U.S. and around the world. As CEO of KDI, Dr. Green transformed KDI from an R&D-focused licensing company to a product-focused consumer packaged goods company with a global supply chain and global sales and distribution. He led the construction and the first rollout of LCD manufacturing line in the world, based in Kent, Ohio. So, as you can see, tremendous experience and background in advanced manufacturing. We have a tremendous manufacturing base here in the county, and love to hear from Dr. Green about his experience in that area, and particularly as it relates to growing the workforce in the manufacturing sector. So Dr. Green advocates nationally for U.S. manufacturing. He served on the U.S. Department of Commerce Manufacturing Council, the principal private sector body advising the Secretary of Commerce on manufacturing. He currently serves on Senator Sherrod Brown's Ohio Export Advisory Group. He's worked hard to rewrite the perception of Northeast Ohio's Rust Belt manufacturing from the 3 Ds to the 3 Hs. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, because I think there has some particular relevance to Ashtabula County with respect to the perception of manufacturing as an industry that is great and viable for career opportunity. Dr. Green, he drives local economic advocacy by serving on the board of directors at Team NEO, Jumpstart, and Kent State University Research Corporation. So prior to joining Kent Displays, Dr. Green was Vice President and Division Manager of Science Applications International Corporation. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Physics from the University of Chicago and a PhD in Physics from Stanford University. The only thing I know about physics is it's not been kind to me over the years. So. He also attended the Executive Summer School at MIT Sloan School of Business Administration. And he's the holder of 26 patents. So with that, I will say welcome to Dr. Al Green. So thanks.
Thank you.
Help me welcome. The one thing I didn't mention, though, is that you're also an adjunct professor in chemical physics at Kent State
Yeah,
University?
yeah.
Right. So all of these things, I have no idea what they are, so you're gonna have to explain to
No.
us, right?
No, we'll
For
talk about other
people
stuff.
like me, you know, physics and chemical physics. But it's interesting that you've had such a career. So you started out, you did your undergrad in Chicago, you did your graduate work at Stanford. So I'm assuming you're not from the area?
I'm not. I'm
Okay.
not.
So could you share with us, because it's always, I think, helpful for us in Ashtabula County to understand people's perceptions of us, and you can lump Northeast Ohio in, because I know you haven't been in Ashtabula County that much, but what's the outside perception of Northeast Ohio as a place to live and do business?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we'll start out on this topic, and then we'll kind of loop back and talk about how it relates to perceptions of manufacturing in general. But one of the things that's interesting that was kind of a little bit of a surprise for me when I moved here. I moved here in 2007 to take over to run Kent Displays as CEO. And one of the first things I saw was, as a person that was living here, it was a great place to live. And what was curious was that the people in Northeast Ohio didn't seem to think so. It was quite shocking to me, because when I would talk to other transplants like myself, we all had the same story. It was, wow, these folks don't really know what they have, you know. I gave a talk at the Union Club in Cleveland, and also another one at a Cranes manufacturing event. And one of the things that I talked about in that talk was, when you look at other cities, okay, I have some examples here. So, what they call themselves. So let me see if I can pull that up real quick, if I can find that real quick here. Just 1 second. Okay. So if I look at, so Pittsburgh, they call themselves, they're the city of champions. Washington, where I lived before coming here, capital of the free world. San Francisco, where I was in the Valley as a graduate student, they're the Golden City. Chicago, city of broad shoulders. Detroit's Motown, Nashville's Music City, Memphis, birthplace of rock and roll, Vegas is Sin City. Okay, and then when I got here, I heard references from people living here, Mistake by the Lake. And I said, why is that? So what my takeaway was, enough with the gloom and doom. I mean, it's for those of us that have moved here, and I'll talk about Northeast Ohio in general, there's a lot of things here. There are a lot of assets, and just there's one of the things I speak about is the quality of life. When I lived in the Washington D.C. area, there are two things that jump out at you. One is the congestion. And I came here and people always talk about the weather and the snow. Go to D.C. in the summer. 95 degrees, 95% humidity for 40 straight days. It's because it's it's a swamp, it's just in terms of weather. And so enough of the doom and gloom. And that's just a perspective, I think, of sort of someone coming from the outside.
Great. Well, I can't help it. We have great drainage here, so so I won't. That's my only political joke. So, I think that's really interesting because I think I had mentioned to you in our conversation over breakfast that I was originally from the county and came back about I'm pushing 3 years now, and it's been fantastic. But I think part of that is that same reason is that I think there's a message around here, and I think many people would agree that oftentimes we're harder on ourselves than we should be, and I sometimes often think there's an opportunity for us to do a better job in continuing to promote the great assets that we have collectively, both not only economic assets but social assets, environmental assets, quality of life assets that we have. So it's interesting, and I appreciate those comments because I think those are opportunities for us to continue to help grow our county, both from a development perspective, but also from a workforce perspective in terms of retaining young people who may think that the grass is greener on the other side, somewhere outside the county, but also in that boomerang effect, if you will, in bringing folks back like myself who were, in their 40s and having children and wanting to be closer to their homes. So that's good to know. So there's a lot going on in Northeast Ohio these days, and much of it's focused on how we can better innovate. So I understand you're involved in one such activity in the Cleveland area called Cleveland Innovation Project. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure, yeah. And there's a lot going on in a lot of different areas. There's a lot of it's focused in and around Cleveland. There's the Destination Cleveland study. There's another study on what is the region going to look like in 2030. The one that I've been the most closely associated with is called the Cleveland Innovation Project. It's basically a study around, when you look at the region, what you see is that when we compare ourselves to, it's a little bit of doom and gloom here, so when we compare ourselves to like cities, and like cities would be like Nashville, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Columbus, a couple other cities, in terms of sort of similar demographics, population, so on. We don't do well from an economic development standpoint, and lots of different metrics, from diversity, equity, inclusion to the amount of capital that's available for startups, to the number of startups that we have, and things of that sort. And the idea is, what are some of the big bets, is what we call the region should look at. There are a couple that really jump right out at you. I mean, the first is when you look at the region, life sciences and healthcare is, frankly speaking, we're among the best in the world. I mean, the clinic is not just a national brand, it's a global brand. It's basically the Apple of the world in terms of healthcare. So what can you do more in the area of healthcare as you look at digital medicine and things of that sort, life sciences, diagnostics, wearables? What should we be focused on so that we can, again, more jobs and things of that sort? Another, of course, is in the area of manufacturing, which is really important here as well. Basically, when you look at the region and Ashtabula itself, I mean, we have a gigantic footprint in manufacturing. That is an asset. And so how do we promote that asset? Again, it's about economic development, more jobs and revenue and so forth. And so as you look and you say, well, what is the direction? What are some of the future trends? And I think this was another thing, so I'll talk about it now. What are some of the future trends that we see in manufacturing? There's a couple that jump right out at you. You've heard the term Internet of Things, where basically devices or equipment or cars talk to each other, and can have transactions, can do all kinds of stuff. But where that fits in with manufacturing is, you can imagine that because we have such a large installed manufacturing base, much of that equipment is aging. And if you're a manufacturer, among the worst things that can happen is a piece of equipment fails, because now you're losing revenue, you got to get repaired. And so you can imagine a future where you attach sensors to the manufacturing equipment, and that equipment those sensors are talking to each other, they're talking to the people that are monitoring it, and essentially you can do repairs before something actually fails, so preventative maintenance. And that's an area that looks very exciting, and the question would be, well, as new companies start in this area of Internet of Things and diagnostics, the Northeast Ohio is a great place for that company to be. Why? Because you have a base of a lot of companies that would essentially buy their products. So that's one area. Another area in manufacturing that people are looking at is the area around digital manufacturing. And basically, what that's about is where you have, since so much of manufacturing is automated today, you have a scenario where the worker is actually is not the same location of the equipment, and that's an interesting proposition, particularly when you combine it with trends that we see in telecommunications. You've heard about 5G, for example, and how do you utilize this high-speed internet connectivity so you can tie workers that are in perhaps underserved areas that are far from the actual manufacturing equipment. And the idea is, can you set up a test bed around that, around those kinds of things? And I think for remote areas, it's particularly exciting because you have workers that may be living here that are controlling equipment that's maybe down in Kent, or or in Cleveland or whatever. And so those are a couple of the trends and exciting things that we're working on, and what are the big bets that we should be making.
Great, those are some exciting things. And it's interesting to me because I think there are, in that transfer of technology and that transfer of knowledge that's coming out of efforts like the Cleveland Innovation Project, do you see opportunities for smaller to medium-sized companies to get engaged? Is there some, and where I'm headed with that question is that I think a lot of larger manufacturers, right? You're talking in Cleveland, the Eatons of the world are going to be engaged in those types of efforts. Yeah. But in a county like Ashtabula, where a number of our businesses are very small, yeah, revenue of $1 million to say $30 million, are they want to be involved, but at the same time, they may not have the capacity and leadership to be able to be engaged in projects. Are there opportunities for them to become involved?
Yeah, and that is something that has been discussed at length, because there's the larger companies have a lot of times more bandwidth to do this. There's also other barriers as well with the larger companies, but the idea is to make it simple and create opportunities or collisions, we call it, between the smaller companies and the larger companies and higher ed and things of that sort, to get part of it as a culture change, where we've done it this way yesterday, we do it today, and tomorrow we do the same thing. So I think part of it is a culture change, part of it is an education experience. We've talked about how to educate the smaller and the medium-sized companies. So it is an issue, and it's something that we've discussed.
Right. Well, it's good to hear that there are efforts to try and find opportunities for inclusion for smaller companies.
Yeah.
So, we're working on that line of manufacturing. We talked about manufacturing, but when you look at the development of, say, the regional economy, you mentioned healthcare, biotechnology is certainly one that's seen a lot of development, and a lot of times people think you need to change from who you were and what you were as an economic base, but here in Ashtabula County and regionally, our economic base has been manufacturing, and we think there's opportunity for continued growth around that, and that's been a trend and a discussion nationally. How do we bring back manufacturing? Can you talk about some of your experience with respect to building on that base and bringing back manufacturing opportunities and growth within the Northeast Ohio region?
Yeah, so I can, and I one area that you hear a lot about in the news today is bringing back manufacturing jobs to the U.S. And I think that it's important to have that discussion. Look, when I was running Kent Displays, we had a global manufacturing operation, and what I learned from that is that for all there are some industries and manufacturing that have left and they ain't coming back, and it's okay. It's okay, because Because, and there are a couple reasons for that. I mean, one reason is that they, some of those jobs simply don't pay a living wage. I mean, it's a first world country we are, and so living wages, I mean, those jobs simply don't pay living wages. And American consumers are not willing to pay the premiums associated with those sorts of things. And heck, I mean, look, assembling a quarter penny, resistor on a PCB or printed circuit board by hand, it's just not worth it. I mean, we should be more forward-looking and more innovative. The second area, the second reason why I think some of those jobs aren't coming back is the thing about supply chain. You hear certain things about the one that's probably the highest profile that you hear in the news is well, the iPhone, make the iPhone in the U.S. It ain't gonna happen. I mean, and the reason is that the supply chain for 90% of the parts in the iPhone aren't here. So even if you did assemble it here, you're importing, this is one of the things, you're importing all the parts anyway because the supply chain is not here. Now, what we do is the value added associated with the iPhone and the engineering of it and the user interface, those support living wages. please keep those jobs here. And what do we need to do to keep those jobs here? So I think that when we talk about bringing jobs back, we have to make sure that we're doing what we do best is innovate. That is what we do best. And so when we're looking at bringing manufacturing jobs or jobs in general, they should be on those kinds of areas where touch labor, which is expensive in the U.S., that's not what you're focusing. You're focused on value added labor. So those are my thoughts on that.
Right. Well, and I agree with you completely, and I think there are some opportunities in the manufacturing sector that are ripe for growth and ripe for reinvestment, if you will. So for us, I think it's chemicals, and we have a strong chemical base, and we have the resources to be able to support the chemicals industry. It's advanced materials development, whether that's in composites or fiberglass. But it's also development that's going to be related to energy development. So we sit amongst one of the largest resources of natural gas, the Utica Marcellus Shale. So there's going to be a lot, again, and that's sort of in that chemical vein.
Right.
So when you look at all those things and you look at, this kind of gets back to the perception, but I want to, we talked about the regional perception, but I want to talk about perception as it relates specifically to manufacturing. And you gave a talk on this recently. And how can we regionally get people thinking about manufacturing as a good thing? And in particular, how do we get young people thinking about manufacturing as a good career opportunity?
Yeah. I mean, we were having a conversation over breakfast. I mean, it's the three Ds. I mean, manufacturing the perception is, the 3 Ds: dirty, dark, and dangerous. But I like to talk about manufacturing with what I call the 3 H's, which is, high tech, high value, and high paying. And because that's what it is. I mean, today's manufacturing is really about that, and we have to effectively get that message about in how we talk about manufacturing. A lot of manufacturers today, talk about the difficulty in attracting workers, and I think part of that is that, look, the problem is real. I mean, especially now where unemployment is historically low. But part of it is how we project, again, the career of manufacturing, of how attractive, it can and is. And so we should brag about that. The other thing is, we have to be realistic about the changing workforce. I was first year of the baby boomers. I was born in '65, so don't calculate my age. But when I when I was coming up, I mean, it was, you know, it was about security and stability. I think probably identify more with the baby boomer generation. But today's workforce, the millennials, which, you know, which people talk about it, it's really more about purpose and culture. And we have to make sure that we're meeting the new workforce where they're at. And so promoting, I think the days of, you know, put up the help wanted sign and they will show, they'll come, those days are done. You're competing for workers. And you know, when you look in the valley, Silicon Valley, you know, and you know, they're not struggling for workers, but their work environment, I mean, the young go there because they get, you know, they get the freedom to customize their work area. They get flex this, or flex stuff I certainly didn't grow up with. But we have to take into consideration the fact that this is the workforce of tomorrow, and we have to meet them where they are. So, well, we should probably take a few questions from the audience, if there is any, we can, you know.
Yeah, certainly we can keep this open and free flowing. So if you have any particular questions, yeah.
My concern has been that, my concern has been that as we, as a country, have sought cheap labor, we have given away our technology secrets or whatever to foreign countries that now are using that against us. I wondered what your perception was of that.
Yeah, I mean, that is for sure, that is a real issue. You know, however, I sort of have a slightly different lens on that. I think that, you know, there are certain industries that have been, I would say, given away. And you know, one industry is the LCD industry, which is just a real tragedy. I mean, it's a multi-hundred-billion-dollar industry that basically is no longer in the U.S. It's really it's really in South Korea right now, most of it. But I think, again, the focus, you know, is what is you know, in the U.S., we're great at getting what is the next big thing. I mean, look around at what dominates the economies of the world today, and they were kind of born here. I mean, the internet, you know, cellular phones, GPS, you name it. I mean, there are products, and we're good at doing those sorts of things. And so I like to focus on those things that we're the best at. So that's my view on that.
Great. Other questions in the back?
What would you say millennials are looking for regarding, in organizations, regarding culture and also, you know, some of the other facets that they might be looking for in an organization to go
Yeah.
out there?
So the question was, is what are some of the things that millennials are looking for that I've seen in the workforce? So first of all, let me confess that it was a learning experience for me, for sure, because it was not how I grew up. I think a couple of things, you know, as I grew Kent Displays and we hired more and more people, you know, I think that one of the things is the ability that they're looking for free expression, you know, the customizing of their workspace, the freedom to be an individual, their individual, which I frankly was a good thing. Another thing that is a little bit of a learning for me was that if the workplace or the employer doesn't have a purpose, that they're looking for purpose, and it's, I don't want to say more important than the money side, but it's as important. And that was a bit of a learning for me, was that you know, if they want to believe that their employer is on a mission. And it could be a mission to create the best possible chemicals for, you name it, some other business. But they want to believe in that mission. And if you don't get that part right, it's just, you're just gonna battle them over salary, and then they're gonna leave when they get to the next higher offer. That's what I've seen, so.
You know, that's it's a really interesting question, because, you know, we've been talking a lot about manufacturing, and as you know, the manufacturing, the day-to-day process, the day-to-day work within a manufacturing environment tends to be the same as similar to what it was, because it was built off a platform that was developed over 100 years, right? And I don't know that in certain sense, in many cases, that the environment has changed to meet the needs of the millennials and the wants of the millennials from a workforce perspective. Have you seen, whether it's through the Cleveland Innovation Project or other areas, where there's been a focus on sort of human resource development, to bring them into companies to say, culturally, here's how you might need to change and morph in order to be able to attract and retain that millennial workforce?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it, and I think that you know, certainly the value of employee development, you know, and I think this is another particularly important for millennials. But what I've seen is that they have, no matter what level, it could be the shop floor person to, you know, the lead engineer. They want to see that you have employee development as part of the package, that they can, you know, continue to step up and do things. That's one of the things that I noticed.
Right. So more engagement. Other questions that audience might have? Yeah.
The questions or statements that you made earlier was concerning. You were with a group of people and you were discussing what things look like in 2030 as far as manufacturing and innovation. Is there a sneak peek into that conversation or a glimpse into that vision that you can give us of what perhaps on that level you see in the early stages of what we look like in 2030?
Yeah, well, you know, I did try to talk about, from a manufacturing perspective, some of the things we're doing in the Cleveland Innovation Project on those things, in terms of digital manufacturing, in terms of Internet of Things, and how you use high bandwidth self-driving cars is a big deal. You know, another item of interest is, you and I, again, we're having a breakfast conversation. One of the areas that we should also look at is the area of sort of next generation logistics, because that's just an asset. We're just ideally located. I mean, it's the Midwest. It's close to a lot of customers. It's a traverse route, and so how do we exploit that resource, that asset, I should say, that asset to again attract workers, more jobs, more you name it. Because one of the things that you see, okay, is that again, when you look at the region, we're losing population. You know, we are, and we're losing it. I mean, we're losing obviously to the Sun Belt. We're losing it to you know, Florida and, you know, the Southwest. You know, one statistic which is really sobering. I mean, in higher ed, for example, you know, if you look at Northeast Ohio, the population of graduating seniors won't reach the level that we have today. It's going down, but it won't regain till 2050. It's just population. I mean, it's a population thing, and we're doubly hit by it because people are leaving, going to other areas, and you know, part of that is because, you know, when you look at what was happening in the country around, 2000, or early 2000s, I mean, there was a recession. Birth rates went way down. And so that population is now graduating from high school, and it's just less of them, So the idea of coming back to your question is, how do we as a region combat those kinds of things? What do we look like in 2030, 2040, and so on?
Yeah, and I think a big part of that for us at the Growth Partnership is changing that perception for young people of Ashtabula County as a place to live and build a career, whether that's staying here out of high school or whether that's coming back after college or after a point in your career development. So, Kevin, I think you had a question?
Yeah, Alex, it's a little bit off of what Chris said, but can you share with us your knowledge of any new LCD products that are under development now that will be rolling out in the next 5, 10 years?
No. I mean, the areas that we were working in, we had a very specific LCD technology, which we rolled out in 2010. And this was, without getting into a lot of details, this was a writing application rather than a projection like an LCD display technology. So that's about as much as I can say.
Great, recognizing that we're getting a little past 9 here. Any further questions? I mean, yes, Mr. Hockenay.
Just talking about I didn't hear you mention recycling or reuse economy at all. Part of that being a logistical center means we're next to everybody's trash as well. So you mentioned healthcare, you mentioned a number of other fields. Is there any effort to develop kind of a knowledge base in this area? I think as a state, probably even as a country, we have a pretty dim record on effective recycling and reuse of products.
It hasn't been discussed, but my interest is piqued after hearing some of our conversations. It has not come up in any of the things that I've been involved in. One of the things that I think we need to do better at in general is, this region, more than any other I've ever lived in, is siloed. I mean, we tend to, we operate in these silos where we have these pockets of strength and nobody knows about it. and the connections and the collisions don't happen enough where that information gets out. So that's my answer.
Yeah. Well, and I think that leads back to sort of us being able to tell our story about who we are, what our strengths are, what our competitive advantages are. Yeah. So, and we have many of them here in the county, and I think not only from the Growth Partnership, but collectively amongst, I see, many partners in the audience, we're working collectively to get that message out. Many of you I've worked, directly with on that. So I think that's important for our ability to continue to grow here locally, is let people know what our strengths are and break down those silos so that we're engaging more with business opportunities.
I have one final thought, which is a topic we didn't touch on that much. And it's something I actually wrote an article about recently in a column in Smart Business. But one of my concerns is that we have to be careful that we don't, the conversation around about worker training versus worker education. And I think that what I'm hearing a lot of times is that, that the focus is on training a worker to do job X. And I worry about that conversation. I think that my experience is that, yes, they should be, trained to operate X, Y, and Z thing, but the more important thing is to educate them to think through things. Because what you're training for today may not be around tomorrow. And the thing that I sort of my closing thought is, there's an old parable that I've tried to paraphrase a little bit. And it's the first part is the old part. Give a man a fish and you'll feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you'll feed him for a lifetime. Enlighten him or her to think like an environmental scientist and you'll feed the world. And I think that we have to be careful to not, particularly in higher ed, to not just think about training for today's jobs, but educating for tomorrow's jobs. Okay.
Thank you. Any last questions? No? Well, then let's give a warm thank you to Dr. President. Thank you. One last thing I'll mention is that the Best of the County Growth Partnership's annual event, Best of the County, is September 17th, which is, what, a week and a half away. So get your tickets if you'd like to attend. Love to have you there. But thanks, everybody.